What is going on, Michigan fans? Clayton Sayfie with EJ Holland from the Wolverine.com. Check us out at the Wolverine.com for free for 60 days. All of our premium content. Use the promo code Blue60 to get all of that. And I should welcome in the Michigan State fans that are probably watching EJ as well in here. But and we welcome them as well. They can subscribe and like the video, and we appreciate their viewership. But it has been an eventful day. This is our signing day special recruiting show. The late signing day, usually not too many fireworks in the late signing period, but there were today with Michigan flipping Rayshawn Benny, the Rivals 100 defensive tackle out of Oak Park, signing George Rooks, hanging on to him, no drama there in the last few days of his recruitment. And then Ike Awuna out of Texas, the three-star defensive tackle, he flips from Colorado after notching a Michigan offer just, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. And here we are, a class that didn't have many defensive linemen or defensive tackles in the fold. Now has some very, very good ones, including Rayshawn Benny as the headliner here. So, but man, I mean, let's start with Rayshawn Benny, EJ, because obviously that's the biggest story of the day. Just, I guess give people a rundown about how this played out, because you've been reporting on this for a long time since he committed to Michigan State back in November, that Michigan was still pushing. He didn't sign in the early period, and here we are. Ron Bellamy, Sean Nua, Mike McDonald, all those guys. Sharon Moore, shout out to him as well. We're able to get it done here at the last minute.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of how it went. Once Rayshawn committed to Michigan State, it seemed like he was going to be pretty locked in, especially with the uncertainty around Jim Harbaugh and the staff movement. Obviously, he didn't sign during the early period. And I think that kind of left the door open for Michigan to make a run. If you remember, right after the early period, I posted and said, hey, there's a lot of optimism around Michigan that they can flip him now that he didn't sign early. That optimism faded as Michigan started to make, its staff changes, which is, not surprising considering there was a lot of movement on the defensive side of the ball. But the way they ramped things up here at the end, especially going into the weekend, it looked pretty bleak. I put the chances of Michigan landing Rayshawn Benny coming out of the weekend on Monday at 30%. So I still had a little bit of, I guess, hope that it would be that what I was saying would come true, that Benny would indeed flip to Michigan. And I kind of stayed around that same area on Tuesday, and then Tuesday night I posted in Blue Chips and said, hey, the chances are a little higher. And then I wrote that signing day preview like close to 2 a.m. and I was like, yeah, it could change in the morning as you're reading this. And literally like 30 minutes after I woke up, it did in fact change. So I think the staff just did a tremendous effort. Everybody was involved in this recruitment. I know everybody wants to give Sean Nua credit, and rightfully so. Obviously, it was a strong close to the defensive line, but this was a whole staff effort. Everybody was involved um, from Ron Bellamy to Mike Hart to Sharon Moore to Mike McDonald, Jim Harbaugh. I mean, every person on this Michigan staff was basically in on the Rayshawn Benny recruitment. They really went all in, and that should tell you how much they value Rayshawn Benny and what they think he can become. So overall, it was just a tremendous effort by this staff to flip Benny, even when things looked not so great. They never stopped fighting. And on the flip side of the coin, I think Benny did want to be at Michigan. Remember, Michigan was the early leader, and he kind of bought into some of the stuff that Michigan State sold him on. And Michigan season and the uncertainty didn't help. But with all the pieces in place, it just ended up working out the right way. And I think you're already seeing the new staff paying dividends. Like I said, Bellamy, Hart were both involved, and I'm not sure if Michigan lands Benny without those guys.
Yeah, and let's talk about the staff just a little bit more. When you look at exactly what went into this decision for Rayshawn Benny, we kind of talked about it with George Rooks, where it wasn't one thing in particular. It was just probably where he felt most comfortable. He had a good relationship with Sean Nua. He was also being recruited very well by Sharon Moore, was feeling the love from Michigan, and that kind of won out in the end. It kind of feels that way, similar to me with Rayshawn Benny, who is a kid who was committed to Michigan State, obviously, um, but was able to still open up his recruitment. Keep it open, keep the lines of communication open throughout the late period here, heading into the late signing day, where he wanted to be at Michigan all along, chose Michigan State. They had the momentum. Mel Tucker did a good job, and you give them credit initially for that. They beat Michigan on the field. Kind of felt like it was trending that way. He ends up picking Michigan State, but like you said, it kind of felt like he always wanted to be at Michigan. He's always had a good relationship. When I talked to him a few times in the fall, he would talk about Sean Nua, he would talk about Jim Harbaugh and Sharon Moore and what he liked from those guys. Now you mentioned some other guys, a full staff effort from Ron Bellamy, who the newly hired wide receivers coach, former head coach at West Bloomfield, obviously going to be a stud recruiting in the Detroit area. Mike Hart, who is just a Michigan guy through and through. Everybody knows who Mike Hart is, and he's a fantastic recruiter. And then the same guy, and then Mike McDonald as well, coming in as the new defensive coordinator. And then the same guys that were recruiting him are still around. I think it was just kind of the perfect storm, would you say? Would you agree with that? That it was kind of similar in a way to Rooks, except he just had to make a bigger leap and actually, kind of decommit from Michigan State here at the last second?
Yeah, I think with everything settled into place, the longer he thought about it, the more Michigan pushed, the more Michigan sold its own brand appeal, how much they wanted him, with Ron Bellamy working behind the scenes with some people close to Benny. I think it all just kind of added up. And as we, said on the eve of signing day, it started to trend a little better. And then obviously in the morning is really when it kind of went to the moon. So I guess it was just a kind of more of a familiarity thing like Rooks. And at the end of the day, Michigan's nonstop effort with all these guys really, really paid off.
Yeah, they were relentless with this guy and wanted him from the get-go and ended up getting him. Let's move on here because this is all kind of in a similar context because we're talking about 3 defensive linemen that Michigan signs. But the next guy will go with Ike Iwuna because we've talked about Rooks as a commit, and we'll talk about him signing as well when we wrap up and just talk about this class as a whole and the finish to the class as a whole. But Ike Iwuna, 3-star kid, was committed to Colorado. He committed, just a few weeks ago, and then he got his offer from Michigan, and that kind of changed some things. Mo Linguist, obviously heavily involved here, who is from the Dallas area and has ties all around Texas and, has coached there for a long time, near where Ike Iwuna is coming out of in Texas. Just talk a little bit about how this went down because obviously that Michigan offer was huge for him and kind of shook up his entire recruitment. Ends up siding with Michigan here, silently committing a few days ago and then inking here on signing day today.
Yeah, I think with Ike, as soon as he got that Michigan offer, he knew he had a tough decision to make. A lot of times kids talk about academics and then they're not really serious about it. Ike definitely is. He's a high academic kid. He values the Michigan education. So that was number one. Number two, Michigan did a really nice job on pitching him on their resources and player development, strength and conditioning program, all of that. Ike will be the first one to tell you that he's a raw kid, that he still has to learn the technical aspects of the game, that he's still coming along in that respect, as well as developing his body in the weight room. So he really liked the resources that Michigan had to offer. Those were the 2 biggest factors for Ike when he made his decision to flip from Colorado to Michigan. It wasn't necessarily about the relationships with the staff. They only had about a week to recruit him before he signed. It was about what Michigan could offer both in the classroom and on the field. Of course, I think Sean Dula did a nice job of connecting with him and making him feel comfortable. But co-defensive coordinator Maurice Linguist deserves a ton of credit here as well. With him being a Dallas guy, he answered some of the questions that, only a guy like him could answer. That's a Dallas native that decided to make the leap up to Michigan and move up north. Ike has never left the state of Texas before. And, I think he's really, really excited to make a move and to see something different. And I think that's something that Coach Linguist really hit on. And for me, it's pretty cool to see it just from a personal standpoint, since I'm a Dallas guy too, and moved up north. And I kind of joked with Ike yesterday when we did his commitment story about the snow and how I had to get my wife unstuck from the snow in the alleyway. And so he just kind of laughed and he said he's ready for it. He said the cold's not going to bother him. He's ready to make a name for himself at Michigan and develop on and off the field.
Yeah, I was gonna say before you went into that, it kind of does it remind you of you a little bit? Because didn't hadn't you not been out of Texas for a long time in your entire life until you kind of made some moves up here to the Midwest?
Yeah, I had never left the state of Texas until I was 21. So I can relate to Ike. Ike's doing it a few years ahead of me, but it's just neat to see him, commit blind and sign blind just because of how impressed he was with the program and the education. I mean, he's like I said, he's never left the state. He's never visited Michigan. He's never been up here and experienced, what we're experiencing now with these snowstorms. So I think it's just going to be a cool environment for Ike to play in and to grow in as a person as well.
Yeah, and before we get to what Michigan's getting with some of these guys, when you look at on the field, especially as it pertains to the rest of the class, let's talk about George Rooks real quick. No drama in the 11th hour for a guy, George Rooks, who had some drama in his recruitment, but ends up sticking with Michigan as expected. Wasn't expected to be any fireworks with him, going anywhere else at the last minute. But good for Michigan to hang on to him. And now you basically have your dream scenario. If you would have told Michigan fans, I think 6 months ago, that you're going to get Rayshawn Benny, you're going to close with George Rooks, and then you're going to add another defensive tackle, Ike Awuna. His name hadn't even really come up much before he got his offer a few weeks ago. That's basically a dream scenario. You already have TJ Guy in the fold, a guy who has positional flexibility. He could play the end. He could play, closer to a three technique as well. And then you have Dominic Judice, who's a defensive tackle, who's a two-star and probably more of a project, but at least he's a body in there at a position of need for Michigan right now. I guess George Rooks, just talk about hanging on to him here at the end.
Yeah, the crazy thing is there are so many twists and turns with Rooks that we've talked about endlessly. And at the end of the day, once he committed, he was fully locked in. Obviously, there was no drama with him today. As you mentioned, he signed with Michigan. And I think all these guys kind of complement each other well and bring different skill sets to the defensive line. George Rooks, like we talked about on our previous shows, an athletic body that's really advanced from a technical standpoint. We just talked about Ike being really raw. George, kind of the opposite. He's really, really, again, technically advanced. His father, George Sr., played in the NFL. He trains with NFL defensive tackle Javon Parker. So fundamentally, he's great. He's long. He's athletic. He can play multiple spots along the defensive line. So I like what Rooks brings to the table. Iwana is just a bigger body with a lot of upside. Rayshawn Benny is, I think a little similar to Rooks, but, further along from a physical development standpoint. He's a kid that was originally recruited to play offensive tackle. He's played defensive end. He can slide inside and play defensive tackle. I think there's a lot to like about Rayshawn. You look at TJ Guy, and I think he could be, one of the steals of the class just because of his athletic potential, a guy that received some interest as a basketball player from different schools and ran the point guard for his team. And then you have Jadiz, who, obviously not a very highly touted prospect, but just nonstop motor, nonstop production, really strong kid that just plays with kind of an old school mentality. And you could even throw in Keyshawn Bennett as a pass rusher in there if you want to consider him a defensive end. He's a guy that's going to, play kind of a hybrid backer and come off the edge. So it's a really nice defensive line class and terrific class, really, when you consider where Michigan was a few weeks ago, looking like it was on the verge of maybe not landing any of these guys.
Yeah, and I was kind of going to mention that next. Like when you look at the class overall, this was the number 11 class in the country coming into today. It's now moved up to number 9 as we're speaking right now. Obviously, that could change a little bit depending on what happens with other schools, who they sign or whatever. But looks like for now it'll be at number 9. Um, but when you looked at it before today, and really before the recent developments, this is a, on the borderline, borderline top 10 class. But there was holes in it. We've talked a lot about recently the lack of defensive tackles in this class. Corner is still an issue that they have. Only one corner in this class in Jaden McBurrows, but it was like a talented class, especially at the top with guys like J.J. McCarthy and Donovan Edwards and Xavier Worthy, and it's good they were able to close with the latter two guys that I mentioned. Fend off Alabama for Xavier Worthy, keep Donovan Edwards home away from schools like Georgia and Oklahoma and Notre Dame. But, you just didn't have the defensive tackles. You didn't have the corners. You still don't. But now, I guess, after today, what is your outlook on this class? Because certainly things look a lot brighter now overall, because you really did feel that position of need. I mentioned corner is still out there as something that they didn't hit on in this cycle, but there's some big time guys that could get next cycle. But just your thoughts overall on the class now after, what has been an eventful signing day.
Yeah, it's a really good class overall. I mean, you look at the offensive side, you have an elite level quarterback in JJ McCarthy. You have, tremendous offensive weapons in Donovan Edwards, Xavier Worthy, Christian Dixon, Lewis Hanson at tight end. You have 4-star offensive linemen. You had a great defensive line. The linebackers are great, led by Junior Colson. The only thing that, Michigan didn't land were top players in the secondary, but luckily for the Wolverines, 2022's pretty loaded with a lot of high-end realistic targets. So it'll be interesting to see how Michigan closes in the secondary next cycle. I think that might be the biggest priority in 2022.
Definitely. So that puts a bow on this signing day, which was, like we've said, there's some fireworks that were going on. I got a picture here to show, I think, what Michigan fans were feeling this morning. They were just this was the vibe, like a 4th of July. You're just watching it all go down. And then for another in-state school this was kind of the vibe as everyone kind of checked into work this morning. But yeah, a fun day overall here for Michigan signing day, getting Rayshawn Benny, getting Ike Iwuna, flipping those guys into the fold, and then hanging on to George Rooks, getting his signature and putting a bow on this 23-man class. But that's our show. That's our signing day special recap. Clayton Sayfie with EJ Holland. Remember to check us out at thewolverine.com. Use that promo code BLUE60 for 2 months of our premium content and a 60-day free trial. And we'll see you next time.